There is a specific kind of fear that lives underneath the question, where did this come from? It sounds like curiosity on the surface, but underneath it, it sounds more like, what if the answer just makes it permanent? What if finding out where this started confirms the thing you've been most afraid of? That it's too deep, too early, too woven in to be anything other than just who you are. This video is about that fear, and about why the answer does the opposite of what that fear expects. Not because the answer is easy, but because understanding where a pattern came from is a fundamentally different thing than being sentenced by it. Here is what the next several minutes are going to do. Name the actual mechanism, how childhood emotional environments wire the nervous system's relationship with food, and explain why seeing that mechanism clearly is the one thing that actually interrupts the fatalism rather than confirming it. There is a version of this fear that is very specific. It is the moment you catch yourself doing something and you think, my mother did exactly this. The same late-night pattern, the same relationship with the kitchen after a hard day, the same look in her eyes that you now recognize because you have worn it yourself. And something closes a little when that recognition arrives. Not because you didn't love her, but because if she had this and she never got out from under it, what does that mean for you? That is not a small fear. It deserves to be named precisely, not reassured past. What that fear is actually doing is collapsing two things that are completely separate: origin and destiny. It is saying, she learned this, she carried it, she never put it down. Therefore, I learned this, I carry it, I will never put it down. That equation feels airtight. It is not airtight because what you watched your mother do was not a genetic transfer. It was a learned response. She learned it somewhere, in conditions she did not choose, with the tools that were available to her, and you learned it, watching her, or in your own conditions, or both. But learned is a different category than encoded. Learned means it arrived through experience. And what arrived through experience can be met differently through experience. That is not the same as just decide to be different. It is something much more specific than that. And the specificity is what actually helps. Here is the mechanism, not the general version, the real one. When you were small, you did not have the capacity to regulate your own emotional state. That is not a flaw in how you were built. It is how every human child is built. Children are born with a nervous system that is designed to co-regulate, meaning it settles by being near a calm, regulated adult. What happens in an environment where the adults around you were not consistently regulated, where the emotional temperature was unpredictable, or where feelings were dismissed or too large, or where food was the thing that reliably changed the atmosphere, is that your nervous system learned a workaround. It learned to reach for something external to do what the environment wasn't reliably providing. A way to bring the pressure down, and food is extraordinarily well suited to that job. This is not metaphor. There is consistent research on this, on how early emotional environments shape the way the stress response system develops, and on how children in under-resourced or unpredictable environments develop stronger associations between food and relief than children in more regulated homes. The nervous system learned that food worked. It learned this early. It learned it through repetition. Every time the pressure dropped after eating, every time the static quieted even briefly, the association was reinforced. That is not a character flaw. That is exactly how learning works. That is how every human nervous system encodes anything. Food was the fastest thing that worked. And here is the part that is important to sit with. That child, the one who reached for food because the emotional environment required a workaround, was not weak. She was resourceful. She found a tool that worked in the conditions she was in. The tool is not the problem. The conditions were the problem. She responded to them with everything she had. So what does it mean that this started early? It means the association is old. It means it was reinforced for a long time. It means the nervous system pathway is well worn, that food as regulation is not a new experiment, but a long habit that the body knows deeply. That is real. It would be dishonest to say otherwise, but here is what early does not mean. It does not mean permanent. It does not mean unreachable. It does not mean the nervous system cannot learn a different relationship with regulation, because the same thing that is true of old patterns is also true of new ones. They are built through repetition, through experience, through conditions that allow the nervous system to practice something different. The research on this is genuinely worth knowing. The nervous system retains plasticity, the capacity to form new associations throughout the lifespan, not instantly, not linearly, not without difficulty. But the pathway that food carved into your nervous system when you were 8 is not a fixed channel. It is a well-worn one. There is a difference. And here is the thing about your mother. If she had this, and she never found her way out from under it, it was not because the pattern was permanent. It was because she never had the specific thing that actually interrupts it, the language for what was happening. The mechanism, the understanding that what she was doing made complete sense, given what her nervous system had learned, and that it was a learned response, not a personality, not a destiny, not something encoded before she had a voice. She did not have this. You are watching a video about it right now. That is not a small difference. That is the exact difference. She learned what she learned. You are learning something different. Right now, in this moment, that is already true. If this opens something, if there's a sense of I need to map this for myself specifically, not just understand it generally, there is a guided workbook in the description built exactly for that. It walks through the emotional eating patterns that form in childhood, gently, without excavating trauma, without requiring a therapist in the room, and helps you see where your specific relationship with food came from. Not to assign blame, to give you the origin story in your own handwriting. Link is in the description whenever you're ready. So what now? This is the part where most content tells you to do something. Journaling prompts, therapeutic exercises, a 5-step process for rewiring your childhood. That is not what this is. What actually happens after understanding arrives is quieter than that. It is more like the next time the urge comes, the familiar pressure, the reaching for the kitchen, the wanting something that isn't hunger, there is a small new thing available. Not a technique, not an intervention, just a sentence. This is old. This is the nervous system doing what it learned to do a long time ago in conditions that required it. This is not evidence of who I am. This is evidence of what I learned. That sentence does not stop the urge. Not at first. Not reliably. The pathway is too well worn for one sentence to reroute it, but it changes the relationship to the urge. And changing the relationship to the urge is the step before changing the urge itself. You cannot skip it. Most approaches try to. That is why most approaches for this specific pain do not work. The other thing worth saying directly, if there is a fear that looking at the childhood piece means opening something that cannot be closed, that is a real fear, and it deserves a real answer. Understanding your origin story does not require reliving it. It does not require confronting people who hurt you. It does not require any conversation you are not ready to have. It requires only this: seeing the conditions clearly enough to understand that the child who learned this pattern was responding appropriately to those conditions. She was not broken. She was adaptive. The grief that sometimes arrives with that recognition, she had to be, is real and worth letting land, but it is not the same as the fear. The fear says this is permanent. The grief says this cost something. Both can be true. Only one of them is accurate about what comes next. If you want to go deeper on your specific origin story, not the general mechanism, but your version of it, the resource in the description is built for exactly that. It's there whenever you're ready. No particular timing required. When did you first notice that your relationship with food might have started somewhere earlier than you thought? And what did that recognition feel like? You came into this video carrying a specific fear. The fear that finding the origin would be the thing that made it permanent, that understanding where this came from would close the door rather than open it. That fear made complete sense. It is what the pattern wants. Patterns survive by making themselves feel like identity rather than history. What you carry out is the distinction. The nervous system of a child in an environment that required a workaround learned the most available, most reliable tool it could find. It learned it well. It used it for a long time. It is still using it because no one, until now, gave it the specific information that would allow it to consider something different. That information is what you have now, not a fix, not a timeline, not a before and after, just the accurate story of how this started, which is the thing that changes the story of how it continues. She learned what she learned. She did not have language for it. She did not have a mechanism. She had what she had, and she used it, and no verdict belongs to her for that. And no verdict belongs to you. You are not your mother's pattern. You are someone who now understands where the pattern came from, and that is a completely different position to be in. Not because understanding is the same as healed, but because understanding is the first thing that actually turns the volume down. The pattern makes sense. Not because it is working, but because a child learned it, in conditions that required it, with the only tool she had available. That child was not broken, she was surviving. And the work now, quiet, non-linear, genuinely possible, is showing her nervous system that surviving is not the only thing available anymore. One meal at a time. One moment at a time. Not one childhood at a time.